If an independent observer were to look at the world today and look up to the sky at night, they might look for the Big Dipper, which points to the North Star, the fixed point in the heavens around which everything else revolves, and a reliable guide that we have all used for many centuries. It serves us well on our human journey, not only at the beginning, where we are now, and where we are headed. This presentation about economics and sustainability raises two of the most fundamental questions that we as a species will probably ever have to address. The first, economics, deals with how we relate to our biosphere. Sustainability raises the question of how long can we go on doing what we're doing? And the answers are not simple. Let us take a look at the basic concepts that are at play in the first part. The second part, we will look at three evolutionary phases of our human journey: our original relationships with the global commons, the industrial economy, and the financial economy. And then we'll conclude with a short piece on what I've called Seeds of a Brighter Tomorrow. The root meaning of the term economics comes from the Greek for oikos, house, and nomos, custom or law. Its original root meaning thus has to do with economy or thrift or prudent management of resources and the environment for the home, including water and food. In short, economics. Economics has a sister concept which derives from the same oikos, house or home, and logos, meaning discourse, which deals with the relationship of a house or home with its immediate environment. Today, the modern definition of economics is different. It is defined as the social science that studies the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. It has no longer to do directly with the house or the home. Economics has two main branches. Macroeconomics focuses on the national issues, such as money, economic growth as measured by the gross national product, productivity, employment and unemployment, and national trade balances. Microeconomics, on the other hand, focuses on the individual pieces of the jigsaw, on issues which include how a firm can maximize its profit, where to locate a factory, how to price a particular product relative to its competition, and why people buy yellow widgets rather than blue widgets, and so forth. This modern definition of macroeconomics is both its strength and its weakness. Its strength because it enables both government and industry to monitor evolving free market situations such as inflation, the business cycle, the pace of technological change, shifting consumer tastes and behaviors, and to adjust accordingly. Its major weakness, or Achilles' heel, is that it does not include in its equations the health and well-being of our homes and families, the state of our local environments and the global commons, and the future of our children and the needs of future generations. The major strengths and weaknesses of microeconomics are similar in that it concentrates on the shorter term and narrower issues of the profitability of enterprises. Future value is even discounted at prevailing rates of interest in benefit cost and return on investment analysis, ROI, for most corporate investment decisions. In short, economics tells cows which clump of grass it is best to eat next, but it does not monitor the state or future value of the pasture, which has to do with sustainability. This is like flying a jumbo jet with no fuel gauge. Mission control. We have a situation. Our economic wealth systems are polluting our air, our water, and our soils. Increasing CO2 levels are melting polar ice. Mountaintop glaciers all over the planet are disappearing. And the situation on the Tibetan Plateau is particularly serious as it threatens the major rivers of Southeast Asia, including the Yellow River, Sichuan, Yangtze, Mekong, Salween, Ganges, Yarlung and Indus. Crop failures and chronic water shortages are now occurring all over the planet, including Australia. Uranium mining at Elliott Lake in Ontario and elsewhere is polluting our atmosphere and our lakes and our waters. Our rivers have become the raw sewers of unfettered greed, beyond simple remediation. No organism, from the lowliest insect to the most evolved human, can survive and prosper without a healthy, chemical and pollution-free habitat, including clean air, clean water, and nutritious food. Since 1900, the rate of extinction is increasing exponentially, from 1 to 10 to 100 and approaching 1,000 species a year. Mother Nature herself is beginning to get upset. I saw this bumper sticker at the time of Katrina. Here comes Mother Earth, and is she pissed? So, let's ask the questions. How did we get into this situation? And more importantly, how do we get out of it? Let us briefly turn the clock back to the beginning and look at the first 3 phases of our journey. At the time of the hunter-gatherer, Mother Earth was abundant, and animals and other food was simply there for the taking. As we spread across the planet, we learned the hard way to survive in all the bioregions, and developed deep knowledge and spiritual connections with all of life, of which we were but a small part. While there are as many creation stories as there are cultures, common to all of them is that we all share a common heritage. As Chief Seattle pointed out, how can you buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land? If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? The wind that gave our grandfather his first breath also received his last sigh. The wind also gives our children the spirit of life. Will you teach your children what we have taught our children? That the earth is our mother? This we know. The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. And whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. This reverence for all creation in the local bioregion is fully consistent with the original meaning of economics and ecology. It is based on the following management principles. All community decisions should be taken with 7 generations in mind. The watchword in this case is stewardship. The objective is longer-term survival, evolution, and wisdom. Mother Earth never charges money for what she freely provides, and it's impossible to buy love with money in any event. So where did money come from? Money arose because of difficulties with the first known form of exchange, which was barter. For example, hunters who could hunt all year round found the need to trade with farmers, and a need arose for tokens of some sort to keep track of the transactions. It was necessary first to develop a system of counting before you could have accounting. Markings on cave walls more than 30,000 years ago represent the first known system of counting based on the 4 fingers of your hand. This system evolved into the Roman system of counting, and you can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 representing the thumb over the first 4 fingers. Tally sticks then came into use, with notches representing the amounts, and the stick was then divided in the middle, and each party to the transaction went away with 1/2, and then came back again later. They compared the halves and tallied up. Various items were used as money in different parts of the world. In Africa, for example, cocoa beans were widely used, as you could eat them in an emergency. Salt and cowrie shells came into use, but cowrie shells could break. The stone cowrie shell reproduction with the lines on it was used in China. Shark's teeth were also used, and from this presumably the expression loan sharking came to be. Animals were used for the longest while in Africa as a store of value. The problem was that they could get sick, die, or be driven off. Metal coins then came into use, and eventually gold became the ultimate store of value. In ancient Greece there is a story of King Midas who lusted after gold, and who requested Dionysus to grant him the wish that everything he touched should turn to gold. His wish was granted, and he discovered that this also applied to food and water. He then asked for his gift to be withdrawn. All money is an accounting system for I owe you and you owe me. Today we have plastic and computer entries. 1776, the date when Adam Smith, the godfather of modern economics, published The Wealth of Nations. He suggested that the wealth of nations is derived from two key components. First of all, natural resources and what you do with them. He gave the example of the pin. So far so good. One can see even today that Canada is a country which relies on the export of raw resources, while Japan and Korea and some of the Far Eastern countries rely on the import of resources from elsewhere and rely on manufacturing as their source of wealth. Adam Smith's second point was to look at land and rent and to see what determined the value of land. And I quote, "The rent of land, therefore, considered as the price paid for the use of the land, is naturally a monopoly price. It is not at all proportioned to what the landlord may have laid out upon the improvement of the land, or what he can afford to take, but what the farmer can afford to give." He therefore saw the value of land not in terms of a biosphere and the living earth, but as an input into the industrial processes. Everything, therefore, was valued in terms of money. If it had no price and could not be bought or sold, it therefore had no place in the market economy. This is still true today. There is no question that he reported accurately on what he saw, but the burdens of monopoly rents and taxation were spiraling totally out of control in both England and France. Thomas Paine, one of the American founding fathers, published his pamphlet Common Sense in January of the same year, noting that these are the times that try men's souls. On July the 4th, again of the same year, the US declared independence from England after the long and well-known dispute of no taxation without representation. Matters boiled over in France for the French Revolution just over a decade later. Leaving aside the question for the moment as to whether Adam Smith's view was socially and environmentally sustainable, let us take a look at what happened next. The Industrial Revolution began in earnest as a result of James Watt's improvements to the steam engine. Let us move the clock forward another 50 years to the UK Limited Liability Company Act of 1855. Under this act, shareholders were liable only to creditors for the unpaid portion of their shares. They were not legally liable for any health, social, or environmental concerns, including child labour. This triggered a huge upheaval in Britain's economic and social structure. It marked the end of the remnants of the feudal system where wealth came from land, and it shifted the responsibilities or the interest from landholders to shareholders. And you will notice where it is marked with a red arrow, the word limited appears on the early stock certificates. The focus changed from concerns about next year's harvest to next quarter's profits, and from local family businesses, John Smith and Sons, to limited liability corporations. The word company comes from the Latin cum pane, which means bread or bread sharing. All family members ate together. If the going was good, the soup became a stew, and in lean times more water went in instead. The absentee shareholders, on the other hand, were only interested in the quarterly profits, and many of the enterprises that started up became sweatshops. As the Industrial Revolution gathered steam, corporations required more and more coal and more energy and more resources. They started drilling down into local ecologies and local communities in order to extract the resources. The industrial economy was essentially a national economy as opposed to the love economy, which was essentially a local economy. The main drivers of the industrial economy are quarterly returns to shareholders, as opposed to stewardship for 7 generations. It operates with no legal, social, or environmental liability. This triggered a reaction in both Bismarck's Germany and in England in the 1870s with the rise of the Fabians and Beatrice and Sidney Webb. As the industrial economy expanded further, there were additional requirements for financing and funding for all the new enterprises that started, and so the financial sector, the stock market and the banks, grew in importance to service the growth. Following World War I, the 1920s, sometimes called the Roaring Twenties, was boom time. The automobile was coming into its own, roads were being built, hotels, motels, people wanted to get around. The financial sector began extending credit and more credit, and let's see what happened over the decade. By 1929, the top 0.1% of Americans had a combined income equal to the bottom 42%. They controlled 34% of all savings, and following the 1926 U.S. Revenue Act paid virtually no tax. Meanwhile, the financial systems benefited from the revenues which came from consumer credit extended to the bottom 42%, which had escalated to some $3 billion, 60% going to cars and 80% to radios. This represents in today's terms some $75 billion. The next major element was speculation. Between 1928 early and September 1929, the Dow Jones Industrial Index doubled from 191 to 381. By September 29, the total of outstanding brokers' loans reached some $8.5 billion, with interest rates for brokers bearing loans as high as 20%. And this translates, again in today's terms, into some $225 billion. It's a huge, mind-boggling amount. The financial bubble burst, triggering a massive downward spiral, 13 million unemployed by 1932, and misery for a decade, made considerably worse by the worst drought in U.S. history. Roosevelt won the 1932 presidential election, and this is an excerpt from his inaugural speech. Practices of the unscrupulous money changers stand indicted in the court of public opinion, rejected by the hearts and minds of men. Truly they have tried, but their efforts have been cast in the pattern of an outworn tradition. Faced by the failure of credit, they have proposed only the lending of more money. They have no vision, and when there is no vision, the people perish. The measure of the restoration lies in the extent to which we apply social values more noble than mere monetary profit. The lady in the photograph is a migrant worker who has just sold her last piece of shelter, a canvas, in order to provide her 3 children with a decent meal. This cartoon cemented in my mind the inconsistencies between the various world views, number one, and number two, it drew to my attention that 2008 is in fact the 75th anniversary of the New Deal. It also suggested to me that, with the benefit of hindsight, that Adam Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, should be retitled The Financial Wealth of Nations. Winston Churchill, in preparing for the post-war reconstruction and development for Bretton Woods, noted, "Don't be content with things as they are. The earth is yours and the fullness thereof." The Bretton Woods system was the first example of a fully negotiated monetary order intended to govern the international monetary relations among independent nation-states, with 3 main institutions: the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization. Following Bretton Woods, there has been a consistent corporate push for larger and larger regional economic blocs. For example, the Europeans started off at 6s and 7s, and then became the European Common Market, and now the European Union. With respect to Canada and the US, the Free Trade Agreement was signed, and then expanded to NAFTA, including Mexico. The real dynamics behind the so-called global economy can be seen by an examination of comparative hourly wage rates. The US average hourly wage rate is some $8 an hour, Mexico is $1 an hour, and China is 25 cents an hour. These corporations took with them the behavior associated with limited liability towards people and the environment. One can point to the Maquiladora trade zone and also to the worsening Chinese pollution problem. This is a World Health Organization map of deaths from urban air pollution, and one can see where the dark areas on the map are. It's no surprise. The multinational corporations, including big money, big oil, big water, big food, big pharma, and Walmart in a category all by itself, have been the main beneficiaries, while U.S. blue-collar jobs, the U.S. tax base, the environment, and the rural and urban poor have taken the hit. Perhaps worse, the U.S. national debt has now reached $10 trillion and is still rising. Just as happened in the UK at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, so did international finance expand to meet the demand of the global economy. In the 1980s, international deregulation was encouraged by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Last year, 2007, $8 trillion speculation in oil futures, $2.9 trillion hedge funds, with our top 10 managers earning $14 billion, and $2 trillion of daily currency trading, of which 90% is speculation. This is not petty cash. And so it's not surprising that when Bear Stearns ran into financial problems as a result of the subprime mortgage meltdown, that this highly leveraged deck of cards started to collapse again. So when we look at the 3 levels, the love economy and the industrial economy, one can see that the finance economy has inserted itself on the top as a global overarching, dare I use the term snowbank, driven by short-term speculation and unfettered greed. If one looks at the sweep of the longer-term tide over, say, the last 500 years, we can see how the weight or the relative preponderance of these 3 layers has changed. The emphasis that we are giving today to the sacredness of all creation and the sustainability of the biosphere has shrunk to virtually zero. Pollution of all sorts, types and kinds has grown dramatically, but the real development has been the preponderance of money over everything else. The reverse side of the coin of credit is debt. Both the 1929 and the present seem to suggest that an economic growth model based on debt cannot ever be sustainable. When it comes to ecological debt, some 80% of everything we buy today will have become garbage within 1 year. We are supposed to be a member of a species called Homo sapiens. However, as the indigenous peoples quietly point out, only after the last tree has been cut down, only after the last river has been poisoned, only after the last fish has been caught, only then will humankind find that money cannot be eaten. At the beginning of this presentation, I suggested that economics was basically about how we relate to our biosphere, and sustainability is the question for how long can we go on doing what we're doing. And the answer is almost certainly not for very much longer. The existing economic system is based on increasing public debt, mortgage debt, credit card debt, ecological deficits, social deficits, budget deficits, trade deficits, and health deficits. Most of all, there's growing ethical and spiritual deficits, and a lack of caring and compassion and foresight in everything that we do. Webster's dictionary defines democracy as that form of government in which the supreme power rests with the people, ruling themselves either directly, as in New England town meetings, or indirectly through representatives. Aptly expressed by Abraham Lincoln's phrase, of the people, by the people, for the people, and not of the people, by the corporations with limited liability, for the corporations. If we are interested in sustainability, it is time to begin thinking not just from paycheck to paycheck, but from generation to generation. Great many seeds that have already been planted that need nurturing. These include Rachel Carlson's The Silent Spring, the Club of Rome, the Brundtland Commission, the Earth Charter, Agenda 21, the vast amount of work that's been done on health and human needs, OECD social indicators, the UN summits beginning with Rio on the environment and ranging through the Habitat conferences on the future of human settlements, the Genuine Progress Indicator, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, and a similar new film coming out on the question of the US debt structure coming out in the fall, called IOUSA. Now, when Jean Chrétien was Prime Minister of Canada, he gave the example of a car stuck in a snowbank and how do you get out of it. And he suggested a little bit forwards, a little bit backwards, a little bit forwards, a little bit backwards, and then suddenly you're out of it. We need socially responsible capital. That is to say that the global casino should adopt responsibilities equal to its rights. This could be encouraged through the imposition of a Tobin tax on transactions and also a capital gains tax on speculations. The industrial economy should be encouraged to assume total environmental responsibility for all phases of its operations. Economics must return to its roots of economy, thrift, and prudent management of local resources, local watersheds, and bioregions. And when it comes to the most important of all, our own children, we need to nurture them at home, with the family, in community, and in nature. It is time to rebalance our financial, social, and ecological values. We need a brand new Deal based on, in my opinion, something higher, holier, all for each and each for all, to quote Alfred Lord Tennyson. We are the people we have been waiting for.